Bitter drama. At Christmas, 3 words from daughter-in-law shamed me right there. That was the line looping in my head the minute my phone lit up with Tessa's name, my daughter-in-law, right as the tide laid a clean strip of silver across the beach behind my window. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask. She announced. 17 relatives. Christmas Eve to New Year's. My place, my food, my beds, my peace. The words weren't a request. They were a schedule carved in granite. Expectation breaks marriages long before infidelity ever tries. We set quiet traps with what we assume, and then call it love when others bleed to fit inside them. Tonight I will not bleed. And if you stay to the end, you'll see why boundaries can save a family when apologies arrive too late. I'm Eleanor Brooks, 72, widow, 2 years into a second life that looks like open water and salt white cabinets. The beach house was my defiant yes to time. A home I could lend to strangers at market rates, and retreat to when the Atlantic forgot itself and softened. My son Mark worries in headlines, hurricanes, falls, insurance. Tessa speaks in bullet points. Who sleeps where, who cooks what, who pays nothing. On the call, she rolled right past courtesy and parked in my bedroom. Dad's back needs the master, she said, meaning her father, not mine. We'll bring groceries. 2 bags of chips, a case of beer, hot dogs, the kind of generosity that comes with a receipt that never arrives. I stood very still at the kitchen island, the curves of the marble cool against my palms, and I listened until she hung up. Then I pulled a yellow legal pad from the junk drawer and wrote a single sentence that tasted like steel. If this will be a hotel, then it will be run as one. I ordered a portable printer, a square reader, invoices with headings so official they made my own pulse slow down. I called Patricia, my accountant, who laughed lightly until I said Christmas week. The numbers were factual in the way title charts are factual. Predictable, indifferent, non-negotiable. Here's what you need to know before we go any further. 3 words would leave Tessa's lips later. 3 words that would scorch the paint off the Christmas star and bleach the air in my living room. I won't tell you those words now. You'll hear them when the room is crowded enough for shame to echo. You'll see what shame does when it meets a woman who has decided not to be small for anyone. When their caravan arrived, 5 vehicles in a line, like a wedding that forgot its vows. The house shifted temperature. Doors slammed. Children shed shoes at the threshold and tracked the road into the rugs. Tessa walked in all satin smile, her mother cataloging my decor with a mouth that pinched when it approved and pinched harder when it didn't. They toured my home as if they'd purchased shares in my oxygen. We figured it's better family uses it than strangers, Tessa said, which is what people say when what they want is free. I led them upstairs with a voice I'd heard at hotels, a voice that makes even the entitled behave because it never raises itself to meet them. The master suite, the family room, the bunk beds, the view, the rules, and then paper. Crisp, white, numbered. The click of the card reader pairing. The coffee table became a front desk. The stack of invoices a quiet sermon about adult choices. A cleaning fee is not a suggestion. A resort fee pays for the Wi-Fi you're already shouting for. A damage deposit assumes best intentions while preparing for the cousin with the heavy hands. There was a beat where they didn't breathe, as if air itself had also been itemized. Then sound returned sharply. Are you serious? We're family. This is wrong. You can't do this. I did not argue. I did not explain. I simply waited, the way the shore waits for each wave to finish pretending it is the ocean. Mark called as if on cue. Mom, what's going on? He asked, and I told him in the tone I reserve for doctors and men who think they know better. Facts, just the facts. Tessa invited 17 of her people for 8 days without asking you or me. It's peak week. I had bookings. There are costs. A silence that meant comprehension. Another that meant disappointment landing where it belonged. Put me on speaker, he said, and I did not. Not yet. There are moments a son must be a husband first, and this was one of them. You're wondering about cruelty? I can feel it. You're asking if a normal person charges family on Christmas. Stay with me. There's a difference between generosity and surrender, and the only way to teach it is to stop performing the latter while calling it the former. Later, you'll judge a choice I made that wasn't about money at all. For now, understand this. People don't respect what they haven't paid for, either with money, with time, or with truth. That night, the house sounded like a mall. TV thunder, drawers slamming, a teenager testing the limits of plumbing. Somewhere downstairs, a figurine cracked. Small, lighthouse blue. It's clean break a neat metaphor. I lay awake. Not from noise, but from clarity. In the morning, I would stand in my own living room and perform the simplest magic on earth. I would refuse to be used. If they stayed, they would choose it with open eyes and open wallets. If they left, I would lock the door and make French toast for one and read until the sun went down like a gold coin into the sea. But the sea wasn't taking coins that week. It was sending omens. A pod of dolphins stitched a gray seam just offshore at dawn, and the light came up the color of forgiveness. I brewed my coffee in a smaller pot I'd hidden in the guest closet with the good towels. And when I turned back toward the hall, I found Tessa there barefoot. Mascara somehow already knew. Phone in her hand. Voice tuned to the frequency people use when they want the world to read them as victim. Mark wants to talk, she said, holding the phone out like a warrant. He doesn't understand why you're doing this. I'm doing it because you did that, I said, and I gestured to the slow hurricane she'd brought into being. Bags, bodies, needs. I took the phone. Hi, honey. He made the sound men make when they meet a boundary they didn't see coming. It isn't anger. It's a shifting of furniture behind their eyes. Let me call you back, he finally said, his voice cooling into decision. I need a minute with my wife. In every family story, there's an hour where the predictable script tries to run. The older woman caves. The younger woman wins. The man smooths. The holiday proceeds. I've acted that script for years. Tonight I chose a new one. If you're still with me at the end, you'll hear what 3 words can do when they land in a room that's already on fire. And why? Even so, we didn't burn. Before breakfast, I wrote a single note and tucked it into the spine of the silver-backed photo frame on the mantle, the one with my wedding picture. It contained a number and a date, and it changed everything the moment someone found it. Not because of money, because of memory. No one saw me do it. No one needed to. Foreshadowing doesn't announce itself. It waits. You may want to judge Tessa now. Don't. Life made her hasty, and the world taught her to hustle warmth from people who confuse grace with availability. I was once that woman in another direction, expecting my mother-in-law to just absorb whatever I couldn't carry. I didn't know then that love without boundaries is pity with nicer linens. I know it now. If the story ended here, you could choose sides and feel righteous. But stories worth telling don't end where comfort wants. They turn where cost rises. After the invoices, before the first pan hits the stove, something else will break. Louder than porcelain, truer than money. Those 3 words are coming. And when they arrive, they will slice the room open and show you what kind of woman I am and what kind I refuse to be. And if you've ever stood in your own kitchen with your name on the mortgage, and your heart in your throat, wondering whether keeping the peace is the same as keeping yourself, you already know why this matters. Stay, not for the spectacle. For the lesson that follows when a family finally meets the bill for what it takes to be one. Building a hotel inside her own home. The morning after Tessa's bold phone call, I woke before the tide had finished dragging its silver line across the sand. She had already blasted a group text. We'll be there this afternoon. 17 of us. Excited. It didn't read like an invitation. It read like an order. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my black leather notebook, the one I use when life demands more than patience, and I began writing. Room rates, cleaning fees, kitchen rules, quiet hours, damage deposits. I gave each bedroom a name. Lighthouse. Still C, White Sands. The master suite, $290 a night. The adjoining family room, $260. The bunk bedroom, $220. Each note was a declaration. This was no free-for-all. It was my home. And now, by their choice, it would be a professional rental. I called Patricia, my accountant of 12 years. She never raised her voice, even when discussing numbers that could make others choke. I asked her what prime beachfront during Christmas was worth. She chuckled at first, until I added the words 18 people, 8 days, peak week. Then her voice sharpened. Eleanor, that's no less than $2,800, probably $3,200, maybe higher with full amenities. She promised to send me an email confirming fair market rates. I wanted it on paper, indisputable. Then I searched local hotels. $245 per night for a modest chain. $410 for Ocean View. I printed everything, stapled it neatly, and filed it under a new folder, Christmas week, rates and proof. As the printer hummed, I checked my kitchen. Pans lined up like soldiers. I labeled each with laminated tags. Wash, dry, replace. I slid my new card reader into the drawer beside the spare keys. On the coffee table, I polished a brass bell until it gleamed like a punchline. A little humor, yes, but also a boundary in plain sight. Anyone who thought they were walking into the free lodging would see the truth sitting right there. By noon, Mark texted, "Mom, you okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine, I have a plan." My son is a good man, but being good often means smoothing things over while the women in his life pay the bill. I don't fault him. I've simply chosen not to carry that role anymore. Then another call came from Tara at Seabreeze Rentals. "Mrs. Brooks, we have a corporate client desperate for a house this size. They'll pay $3,200 up front for December 24 through 29. I looked out at the waves curling like rolled parchment. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes, I told her, and wrote the word alternative at the top of a new page. At 4:10 sharp, their convoy rolled into my driveway, 5 cars strong, as if they owned the Atlantic itself. They unloaded suitcases like a military campaign. Children tore through my entryway, scattering sand before I could greet them. Tessa stepped out first, silk dress fluttering, smile too sweet to trust. "This is perfect, Eleanor," she sang, not looking me in the eye. Her mother, Vivian, trailed behind, surveying my decor like a judge inspecting livestock. "Ceilings feel low," she muttered, dismissing both me and my architect with a single phrase. I didn't argue. I slipped into the voice I'd practiced, the voice of a hotel manager. "Welcome. Let me show you the rooms." Upstairs, I opened the master suite. Lighthouse, king bed, jacuzzi, private balcony. Vivian shoved my jewelry box aside on the dresser like it was clutter. I said nothing. Every insult was simply another item on the invoice they hadn't seen yet. Downstairs, the children bounced on my guest beds with sandy feet. Nick, Tessa's brother, dropped a suitcase heavy enough to scar my walnut table. Someone shouted about cooking dinner. "The kitchen is available," I replied evenly, "with rules." I handed out laminated cards. "No food in the disposal. Clean as you go." Silence after 10. They stared as if I'd spoken a foreign language. For the first time, I saw something flicker in Tessa's eyes. Surprise. Maybe even the faintest suspicion that the woman she thought would cave was standing firm instead. I arranged check-in packets on the coffee table. Floor plans, occupancy lists, safety rules, pens clipped neatly, card reader glowing green. My polished brass bell gleamed like a crown jewel. The stage was set. But then a mini twist. Little Mia, one of the cousins, darted to the fireplace and tugged open the curtain. Behind it was the silver photo frame of my wedding day. Her giggle drew attention. Nick picked it up, turning it over. My hand moved calmly, reclaiming the frame before they saw too much. The back hinge clicked. Quiet, but to me, it sounded like a seed cracking open. The folded note I'd hidden behind the photo, numbers and a date, stayed tucked in place. It wasn't time yet, but it reminded me. Even the house itself seemed ready to testify. I guided everyone to the living room. "We'll handle accommodations now," I said firmly. Tessa laughed, brittle as glass. "Eleanor, you're making this too serious. Family doesn't need check-in forms. Family respects the owner of the house, I answered softly, placing my hand over the card reader. Its green light pulsed like a heartbeat. Then the second twist landed. My phone buzzed. Tara again. Our client raised their offer to $3,500 if you accept tonight. I didn't show the message, but I slid the alternative folder closer, tapping my pen against it. Tessa's eyes tracked the movement. She didn't know what it was, but she understood one thing. I had options. I passed out sheets. These list your rooms, rules, and the costs associated with an 8-day stay. Vivian rolled her eyes. Costs for family? Costs, I replied, to keep the woman who owns this home from becoming an unpaid maid. Tessa's laugh cracked again, weaker this time. You can't be serious. I smiled politely. Serious enough to print receipts. As the sun bled orange across the water, I stacked 3 piles neatly. Lodging, fees, additional services. One by one, eyes darted across the pages. Some widened, some hardened. Not a single one looked grateful. That didn't matter. Gratitude had been optional for years. Respect was not. I knew what they were waiting for, the moment I'd sigh and wave it all away. That moment never came. I'd spent 72 years playing supporting roles in other people's expectations. Tonight, I was the lead. Before handing out the first invoice, I gave them one last line. Tonight, you'll cook in this kitchen, but before the pans touch the fire, the truth touches this table. And I ask you now, what happens when a family that always takes is forced to look at the real bill? Do they storm out or do they pay up? And when the first invoice slides across the coffee table, who will break first? Me or the daughter-in-law who thought control was hers alone? The invoices hit like thunder. By early evening, the house no longer felt like mine. Towels already littered the floors. Music blared from a bathroom where one of the cousins had claimed privacy. Someone jammed the garbage disposal with shrimp shells. Another nephew shattered the lighthouse figurine I'd collected years ago. My sanctuary had been reduced to a free-for-all resort in less than 3 hours. I sat calmly at the coffee table, my documents stacked in perfect order. The brass bell glinted in the lamplight. One by one, I called the relatives into the living room. They crowded in, still laughing, still talking over one another. They had no idea what was coming. I slid the first invoice across the table. Ocean View Master Suite, $300 per night. Silence. Faces froze, then shifted in disbelief. I handed out more. Family Suite, $250. Bunk beds, $220. Each page itemized the rooms, the length of stay, the service charges, cleaning fee, resort fee, damage deposit. 8 days in neat, black ink. Tessa's father, Harold, turned crimson. Is this some kind of joke? Not at all, I replied sweetly, like a concierge who's repeated the same phrase 100 times. These are standard accommodation charges. You're staying in prime oceanfront property during Christmas week. These rates are actually discounted. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Someone cursed under their breath. Tessa's voice cut through. Shrill, defensive, desperate. Eleanor, we're family. You can't possibly mean this. I leaned back, folding my hands. Family doesn't impose without asking. Family doesn't assume someone will cook, clean, and house 18 people for free. You made a reservation. I provided exactly what you requested. That was the mini twist. They realized I wasn't bluffing. Harold slammed his fist on the armrest. We drove 6 hours for Christmas with family. And you're treating us like strangers at a motel. No, I corrected gently. I'm treating you like paying guests in a premium rental property. Strangers pay less. You're here at family rates. A stunned laugh bubbled up from Tessa's brother-in-law, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. This is insane. We can't afford this. Unexpected expenses can be difficult, I answered, my tone sympathetic but unyielding. That's why I accept cash, cards, or installment plans. That line landed like ice water. You could feel the shift in the room from outrage to panic because they knew I was serious. Somewhere in the back, a teenage nephew shouted, I checked online. There's nowhere else to stay. Every hotel's booked. Heads turned. Hope crumbled. Vivienne, still clutching her handbag like a weapon, tried another tactic. This obsession with money isn't healthy for someone your age. Maybe we should call Mark. The insult was obvious. Play the crazy old woman card? I smiled. Please do. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to learn his wife arranged an 8-day vacation for 18 people without consulting him. Or me. That was when Tessa's mask slipped. For the first time, she looked nervous. I could feel the tension tighten like a rope. They thought they had walked into a free holiday. Instead, they had walked into reality, neatly printed on paper. The invoices lay in their hands like verdicts. My silence was deliberate. I let them calculate, add, subtract, whisper, argue. The numbers didn't change. And just when they thought they might shout me down, my phone buzzed, loud in the quiet. I held it up. Another offer. A corporate client willing to pay $3,500 for just 5 days. That was the looped curiosity, the revelation that I had options they couldn't match. Tessa's husband wasn't here yet, but his voice would soon matter more than any of theirs. Until then, I let the weight of the paper do its work. So tell me, if your own relatives handed you a bill for Christmas, would you pay it to keep the peace? Or would you walk out into the night with nowhere to go? The phone rang again, this time with Mark's name blazing across the screen. Every eye in the room snapped to it, as if salvation might come through a single voice. Tessa nearly lunged forward, desperate to control the conversation, but I answered before she could. Hi, sweetheart, I said, putting the call on speaker so the entire room could hear. Mom, what the hell is going on? Tessa just texted me saying you're charging hotel rates for Christmas. His voice was tight, strained, the kind of tone a man uses when he's trying to choose between anger and disbelief. The relatives leaned in closer, waiting for me to back down, waiting for me to be the one who looked unreasonable. Instead, I spoke calmly, like someone who has rehearsed this moment for years. Mark, your wife invited 17 people to stay in my home for 8 days during peak season without asking me. I had paying clients lined up. I canceled them because I thought, foolishly, that family deserved priority. And now, I've presented the actual cost of the stay. That's all. The silence that followed was sharp. You could hear the relatives breathing, waiting for Mark to take their side. Tessa, he said slowly, is that true? Her face drained of color. For all her careful planning, she hadn't considered the simplest truth, that her husband might not appreciate being left out of this grand scheme. I just thought it would be a nice surprise. For the family, he sighed, and the weight in his voice was heavier than any invoice I had written. A surprise? 3 days notice for 18 people, without even checking our budget, or asking Mom first? Tessa, do you have any idea what this costs? It was the mini twist no one expected. Mark, the son, beginning to shift away from blind loyalty to his wife and toward the truth in front of him. Tessa stammered, eyes darting around the room as if searching for backup. I thought Mom would be happy to have everyone here. She's always saying family matters. Yes. I cut in softly. Family does matter, which is why family should never assume they're entitled to someone else's sacrifices. The room felt colder. The relatives, so loud minutes before, were suddenly quiet, pretending to study the floor. Mark's voice dropped. How much did this cost us? No one answered. Tessa fiddled with her phone. Finally, her father Harold blurted it out, his tone bitter. $5,000. Cash. She's charging us $5,000 to stay. Mark didn't respond immediately. The pause was long, dangerous. And in that silence, I saw the truth dawning. Not just for him, but for everyone. They weren't angry at me anymore. They were angry at the mirror I had placed in front of them. Mom, he said finally, I need to call you back. Tessa and I need to have a conversation. His voice was steel wrapped in calm. Then the line clicked off. Tessa stood frozen, her phone limp in her hand. The others murmured, whispered, avoided my eyes. The tide of control had shifted, and they felt it. I sat back in my chair. My invoices stacked neatly on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply waited, knowing the next move was no longer mine. And deep down, I wondered, when a son finally sees his wife's manipulations, what happens to the fragile balance between loyalty to his mother and loyalty to his marriage? Would he defend me, or would the cracks in his marriage widen until nothing could hold them together? That answer was coming, but not tonight. The living room had fallen into a suffocating quiet after Mark's call ended. Tessa still clutched her phone, staring at it as though she could will her husband's voice back to defend her. But the silence was telling. Mark hadn't rushed to her side, hadn't demanded I tear up the invoices. He had walked away from the call to have a conversation. That was when her shoulders began to tremble. At first, I thought it was another performance. Crocodile tears meant to soften her father's anger or guilt me into relenting. I'd seen those before, in boardrooms, in family squabbles, in every manipulative tactic women are trained to use when they think crying will buy them power. But this time was different. The sobs came raw, uneven, unplanned. Her carefully painted mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. She buried her face in her hands and whispered, I just wanted to fix things. I just wanted us together. Her words cracked open the tension like a thunderclap. Everyone stopped pretending to be furious at me and started turning toward her. Jenny, her sister, blinked in disbelief. Fix things? Tessa, what are you even talking about? Through tears, Tessa choked out the truth. After Grandma Rose died, everything broke apart. Nobody calls, nobody visits. We haven't been in the same room since her funeral. I thought if I brought everyone here, it would feel like before, like when she was alive, like family again. The mini twist landed. This wasn't just selfish entitlement. It was grief, clumsy, and misdirected, poured into the wrong plan. Vivian's mouth tightened, pride warring with recognition. Harold muttered something about bad timing, but even his anger faltered. The children, restless moments ago, stood still. It was as if every person in the room suddenly remembered the empty chair that would never again be filled. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. And you thought the way to honor Rose's memory was to ambush me? To assume I would shoulder the work, the cost, the chaos? Tessa shook her head desperately. I didn't think. I panicked. Everyone said yes so quickly, and I couldn't tell them I hadn't asked you. I thought once we all arrived, once you saw us together, you'd forgive me. Her admission cut through the outrage like a scalpel. She wasn't the villain twirling a mustache. She was a lost woman trying to play matriarch without the skills or the honesty it required. That didn't absolve her, but it explained her. Around the room, people shifted in their seats, guilt creeping into their expressions. Jenny whispered, You told us Eleanor invited us? You lied. Tessa covered her face again, sobbing harder. I know. I'm sorry. I just wanted to hold us together. I didn't think about the cost. I didn't think about anything but not losing what little family we had left. It was a moment of brutal clarity. The daughter-in-law, who had marched into my home with 17 relatives, and a sense of entitlement now sat crumpled, mascara streaked, confessing her desperation to fill a void no one could. And I have to tell you, part of me softened, just a fraction, because I too knew what it was like to lose the one person who glued a family together. But the lesson remained, grief doesn't excuse manipulation. The invoices still sat on the table, the bell still gleamed between us. And the question hung heavy in the air. Would these tears wash away the debt? Or were they just the first drops in a storm no apology could stop? If you've ever watched someone you love break down, after being caught in their own mistakes, you know how confusing it feels. Anger clashing with pity, justice clashing with mercy. So tell me, would you forgive the tears? Or would you hold the line? And if this part of the story touched you in some way, your quiet support through a like and subscribe would mean more than you know. I stood up slowly, letting my chair scrape against the wood floor. Enough, I said, and the single word stilled the room. We can argue for 8 days straight, or we can try something different. You want Christmas here? Then we're going to treat this like a team project, not a free vacation. They stared at me as if I'd grown taller. In a way, I had. I began assigning roles with the precision of a general. Jenny, you're good with children. You'll manage the younger ones and keep them occupied. Brad, you seem practical. You'll coordinate groceries and meal schedules. Harold and Vivian, you'll oversee sleeping arrangements so everyone actually has a bed. And then I turned to Tessa. Koengoy nyo, mascara lam yam, vai kong vào chom. As for you, I said gently but firmly, you're going to call Mark and have him come down here. Then you're going to learn how to organize a gathering instead of springing chaos on everyone. It was the mini twist. I wasn't throwing them out. Tudeng bien tam hua tang mo try hunlian. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jenny slowly nodded. That actually makes sense. Brad muttered, about time someone took charge. Even Vivian pursed her lips but didn't argue. The tide was shifting again, and this time it was flowing my way. I walked to the garage and pulled open the heavy door. Come outside, I told them. Confused, they followed me, still murmuring. And there it was, the 12-foot Christmas tree I'd bought weeks earlier, still wrapped in old blankets. Waiting, gasps rippled through the group. The children squealed with delight. Even Harold, still red-faced from our earlier battle, let out a low whistle. You wanted a family Christmas, I said, pulling back the blankets. Then let's build one together. Boxes of ornaments, lights, garland, all stacked neatly along the wall, were revealed like a magician's trick. I'd bought them because I still believed in beauty, even when I thought I'd be celebrating alone. That was the second twist. My quiet preparation became the tool that transformed the atmosphere. The men wrestled the tree inside. Jenny tree. Vivienne, predictably, insisted on proper ornament placement, but this time her bossiness sounded more like tradition than insult. And Tessa? She stood on the deck, phone pressed to her ear, finally telling Mark the truth. I caught fragments of her words. Apology, mistake, responsibility. For once, she wasn't performing. She was confessing. By the time the last garland was hung, the house looked different. Warmer, softer, like a place that might actually hold Christmas instead of conflict. I knew better than to believe the battle was won. Old habits don't die in one night. But for the first time, I saw something flicker across their faces. Respect. Maybe even gratitude. And as I watched the lights twinkle across the massive tree, I asked myself a question I hadn't dared before. Could this disaster actually become a new beginning? Because sometimes, survival isn't about winning the war. It's about changing the battlefield. And if you've ever had to change your strategy mid-fight, just to protect your peace, you know the strange relief that comes when you finally choose strength over silence. What about you? Have you ever shifted your own strategy to survive the weight of family expectations? Share your thoughts. Your story might help someone else find the courage to do the same. The house glowed with the soft shimmer of lights from the giant tree. But it wasn't just the decorations that made the air different. Something had shifted in the bones of this family. For the first time since they had crashed into my home, they weren't acting like guests demanding service. They were moving like people who belonged to one another. Jenny was on the floor, guiding the children in a game that involved hanging ornaments in color-coded patterns. The children laughed. Their earlier chaos transformed into eager cooperation. Brad returned from the grocery store with actual bags of food this time, not chips and soda, and the look he gave me as he placed them on the counter was almost sheepish, like he was saying thank you without words. Even Vivian, who had been sharp as a knife hours earlier, was carefully unwrapping glass ornaments from paper and handing them to her grandchildren. Her lips were pursed, but her eyes were softer. Harold, meanwhile, wrestled with the heavy base of the tree, muttering complaints under his breath, yet sticking with the task until it stood firm and proud. But the biggest change came from Tessa. When she reappeared after her long phone call with Mark, her face was swollen from crying, but her posture was straighter. She walked into the living room and, for once, didn't try to control the room with her voice. Instead, she quietly began gathering the crumpled wrapping papers and plastic bags left behind from the decorations. Not because I told her to, not because anyone demanded it. She simply did it. That was the mini twist no one expected. The woman who had orchestrated the disaster was finally willing to serve. Dinner that night wasn't perfect. The chicken was overcooked, the mashed potatoes lumpy, and the children spilled juice more than once. But for the first time, they cooked together. Brad chopped vegetables. Jenny stirred sauces. Harold and Vivian bickered gently over seasoning, while Tessa, awkward but determined, followed instructions without taking over. And I sat at the head of the table, watching the impossible unfold. The laughter was uneven, sometimes forced, but it was there. The silence wasn't thick with resentment anymore. It was the natural pause of people finding their rhythm. Somewhere between passing the bread and arguing about dessert, I realized they weren't just surviving this holiday, they were building something new. It hit me harder than I expected. This family, for all their arrogance and chaos, were still aching from Rose's absence. They had been trying to fill her shoes with noise and demands, when what they really needed was guidance and structure. I lifted my glass of wine, and without raising my voice, I said, this is how Rose would have wanted it. Everyone working together, not tearing each other apart, heads turned, eyes shone. For the first time, no one argued. But as warm as the room felt, a shadow lingered, because I knew tomorrow would bring another challenge. Money, expectations, or perhaps a final confrontation that would test whether this change was real or just temporary. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't surviving the storm, it's believing the calm will last. So tell me, do you think a single night of change is enough to rewrite years of dysfunction? Or is this just the fragile calm before the next explosion? And if these moments of unexpected change mean something to you, your support through a simple like and subscribe helps me keep telling stories like this. Christmas morning dawned bright and sharp, sunlight bouncing off the ocean and spilling across the house like a spotlight. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the living room, mixing with the clatter of breakfast preparations. For a moment, it almost felt like the beach house was what Tessa had promised, a place where family could gather and enjoy. But I had one last card to play. The night before, while everyone slept, I had gone into my office and pulled out a folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Neatly labeled in my precise handwriting, Walsh Family Christmas 2025. Inside was more than paper. It was a blueprint, a toolkit, a way forward. By noon, after gifts had been exchanged and the wrapping paper cleared, I stood and tapped my glass with a spoon. "Before anyone leaves," I said, "I have something for Tessa." Every head turned. She froze in her chair, eyes wide like a schoolgirl about to be called on in class. I walked over and handed her the folder. She held it gingerly as though it might burn. "What is this?" she whispered. "Open it," I said. She flipped through the first few pages, her breath catching. Detailed charts, budgets, timelines, responsibility lists, menu templates, notes on lodging options, and even emergency contacts for caterers, grocery services, and local churches that hosted holiday events. It wasn't just organization, it was structure. The very thing Rose had carried in her bones, but never passed down. The mini twist landed. This wasn't punishment, it was training. This, I told her, is a hospitality management toolkit. If you truly want to bring this family together, you're going to learn how to do it properly. Not through lies or assumptions, through planning, respect, and shared responsibility. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jenny leaned over to peek at the binder and let out a low whistle. "This is detailed, down to who brings napkins?" I nodded. Nothing gets overlooked when you're hosting 18 people. Hope is not a strategy. Vivian squinted, scanning the charts. "You made all this?" "I spent years in project management before I retired," I said simply. "Managing chaos is what I know best. Now, Tessa, you can learn it too." The room buzzed with murmurs. Some skeptical, some impressed. Brad actually chuckled. "Honestly, this is better than half the corporate playbooks I've seen. For once." Tessa wasn't defensive. Her hands trembled as she traced a line of text. Month 3, confirm accommodations and travel plans for all attendees. She looked up, mascara still faintly shadowing her cheeks. "You want me to plan next year?" "I want you to learn to plan," I corrected. "There's a difference." That was the final surprise. Not eviction, not revenge, but empowerment. Her eyes brimmed again, though this time it wasn't despair. It was something closer to hope, or maybe fear of failing differently. "I don't know if I can." "You can," I said. "And you won't be alone. Everyone here will have assignments." Hosting doesn't belong to one person anymore. David, who had arrived earlier that morning, slipped an arm around his wife's shoulder. "She's right. If you want to be the one who pulls us together, then do it right this time. I'll help you." The family murmured agreement. Even Vivian, tight-lipped, gave a single nod. The energy in the room was different from the night before. Respect was replacing entitlement. Planning was replacing presumption. For the first time in years, I could almost hear Rose's voice in the quiet. "You taught them, Eleanor. You gave them the tools." But deep down, I wondered, would these lessons stick when the glow of Christmas faded? Or would old habits creep back in when life grew messy again? And it left me with a question I'll pass to you. When someone has hurt you deeply but shows a willingness to change, how much responsibility do you take in teaching them? And if this unexpected twist gave you something to think about, your reflections mean the world. So please leave a comment and share your thoughts below, because your perspective could guide someone else through their own family storm. That night, long after the chatter had died down and the wrapping paper had been stuffed into garbage bags, the house settled into a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't the chaotic silence of people sulking after a fight. No, this was different. It was fragile, uncertain. The silence of people who had finally glimpsed themselves in a mirror and didn't quite know what to do with the reflection. I sat in my armchair, the one facing the ocean, and let the glow of the Christmas tree spill across the floor. The ornaments shimmered like tiny pieces of memory, each one catching the light in its own way. The children had finally worn themselves out and fallen asleep in clusters of tangled limbs and blankets. The adults had retreated to their rooms. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves outside and the occasional creak of the old house adjusting to the cold night air. It was in that silence I realized something important. The turning point wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with fireworks or grand speeches. It crept in on quiet feet, almost hesitant, almost shy, but undeniable all the same. Earlier that evening, after I had given Tessa the folder, the toolkit for how to manage a family Christmas properly, she had vanished. For nearly an hour, I thought she had locked herself in the bedroom, perhaps calling Mark to beg him to intervene, or nursing her humiliation in solitude. But when she came back downstairs, there was no scene, no announcement, no attempt at another performance. Instead, she went straight into the kitchen, rolled up the sleeves of her silk blouse, and began quietly gathering the mountain of dirty dishes. No one asked her to. No one expected her to. For once, she wasn't performing for attention. She was simply doing the work, wiping down counters, refilling the children's water bottles, stacking leftover containers in neat piles. I watched from the corner of the room, saying nothing, but I felt something uncoil in my chest. Maybe for the first time, she understood that family is built not on entitlement, but on service, sacrifice, and responsibility. David noticed it too. He passed by, caught my eye, and shook his head with quiet amazement. "I've never seen her like this," he whispered. His voice wasn't mocking. It wasn't skeptical. It was awed, as though he had just discovered a new side of his wife he hadn't known was possible. The mini twist of the night came closer to midnight. I had risen to make myself tea when I saw Vivian, proud, sharp-tongued Vivian, standing alone by the tree. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't criticizing the way the ornaments had been hung or the placement of the garland. She was holding a single ornament in her hand, a fragile glass angel with golden wings. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was so soft, I nearly missed it. Rose gave me this the year Mark was born, she said, still not looking at me. She told me it would remind me that being a mother is as much about grace as it is about strength. She hung the angel back on the tree with delicate care, patted the branch like it was an old friend, and walked upstairs without another word. It was a confession, small and fleeting, but it told me everything I needed to know. Beneath her steel exterior, she was grieving too. She wasn't angry at me, at least not truly. She was angry at the absence of the woman who had carried the weight of this family for decades. That was the silent turning point, not the invoices, not the confrontation, not even Tessa's tears. But this, the moment when grief softened into memory, when blame gave way to reflection, when people who had arrived as invaders began to recognize themselves as a family again. Still, I knew better than to believe the battle was over. Change is a fragile thing. It doesn't happen overnight. Old habits creep back like shadows. Entitlement doesn't disappear just because someone cries. And arrogance doesn't dissolve after a single round of dishwashing. But as I sat there sipping my tea, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I wasn't bracing for the next insult. For the first time, I felt in control, not because I had forced them to pay, but because I had shown them a new path, and they had, however reluctantly, started to walk it. The real test would come tomorrow, when the glow of the Christmas lights dimmed and real life returned. Would Tessa still take responsibility when the folder became more than just paper? They're the ones that whisper, waiting patiently in the dark for the moment you let your guard down. Have you ever felt that fragile silence? The uneasy calm after chaos, when you don't know if peace will hold or shatter? Christmas morning carried with it a light I hadn't felt in years. The sun rose over the water, painting the waves in gold. And for a brief moment, I sat with my coffee on the deck and let myself breathe. Inside, the sounds of life slowly stirred. The shuffle of feet on stairs, the hushed voices of parents trying not to wake the children, the first crackle of pans heating on the stove. It wasn't perfect peace, but it wasn't the chaos I had feared either. It was something new. When I walked back inside, I paused in the doorway. The living room, once a battlefield, was now a place of cautious harmony. The tree glowed proudly, its ornaments catching the light of morning. Children sat cross-legged in their pajamas, sorting out presents with surprising cooperation. Jenny passed coffee to Vivienne without complaint. Brad was already tidying the kitchen. Even Harold, gruff as ever, had helped one of the little ones assemble a toy truck. And then there was Tessa. She looked up at me with eyes still swollen from the tears of the night before, but she wasn't defensive. She wasn't dramatic. She was simply present, sitting on the floor beside my son, holding his hand, letting herself be part of the family rather than the center of it. That was the final revelation. This wasn't about a house or money, or even Christmas. It was about boundaries, about respect, about the painful truth that family means nothing if it becomes a chain of exploitation instead of a circle of love. So she turned to me in front of everyone and said, "Margaret, I owe you an apology. We assumed too much. Chumtoy, Dale, Makom Hai. And you had the courage to tell us the truth we didn't want to hear." Her voice wavered, but she held firm. Harold muttered his agreement, Jenny added her thanks, and even Brad admitted they had underestimated what it meant to host such a gathering. And then Tessa stood, her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I lied. I manipulated. I made assumptions. I thought I could replace Rose without realizing how much strength it takes to hold a family together. I'm sorry." The room went quiet, every eye on me, and in that silence I realized my choice, to cling to anger or to offer the kind of forgiveness that isn't weakness but wisdom. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "But remember this, family doesn't survive on guilt or obligation. It survives on respect. And respect begins with honesty. It was not absolution. It was a condition." David exhaled, relief etched across his face. He hugged his wife tightly, and for the first time in days, I saw hope flicker between them. A fragile hope, yes, but real. That evening, as they packed their bags and prepared to leave, I felt a surprising calm. The money I had collected was neatly stored away, the invoices filed, the folder for next year's Christmas in Tessa's possession. But more than that, I had reclaimed something greater than dollars or property. I had reclaimed my self-respect. Family, I realized, is not about surrendering yourself until there's nothing left. It's about drawing lines that protect both love and dignity. Without those lines, affection curdles into resentment, generosity turns to bitterness, and gatherings become battlegrounds. As the last car pulled out of the driveway, I stood in the living room with the massive Christmas tree still glowing. It would have been too much for one person, but for 18, it had been just right. And in that moment, I understood the true gift I had given myself. Boundaries that turn disaster into tradition, chaos into cooperation, resentment into respect. Maybe next year would hold new battles. Maybe old habits would creep back in. But I would never again forget this lesson, that sometimes the best way to save a family is to refuse to be consumed by it. So, let me ask you, when you face betrayal or manipulation in your own family, do you set boundaries? Or do you let love become a leash? Because love without respect isn't love at all. And if this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear what it brought up. Share your thoughts and your own experiences in the comments, because your words might help someone else find their courage. Family drama often leaves us raw, but sometimes the hardest lessons can spark the deepest healing. If you found value here, I'd be grateful if you showed your support with a like, a subscribe, or by sharing this story forward. And I hope to see you again in the next one, where we'll uncover more of the heartbreaks and hidden truths that remind us of one thing above all. No matter how complicated it gets, family remains the root from which our lives grow.